Good evening. I'm hoping this is now working. Should be. We begin tonight. It is the 9th of April, 2020, Holy Week, otherwise known as Maundy Thursday, Holy Thursday. It's the night that the Church remembers the so-called institution of the Eucharist, and that's where the focus will be. In most places, they'll celebrate some sort of communion meal, now virtually, of course, and all those disposable individual communion cups and wafers that I so despise, I guess, have become the in thing. It's fascinating how this whole virtual concept of the church is just wipes out the category of community as the liturgical community being able to break bread together. But I have a lot to think through about what that means. So tonight, what we want to talk about is we've said we're going to do an anthropological reading of this week. That's what we're really looking to do. We're not trying to do a theological reading, but I am trying to keep things as plain and understandable as possible. And I mentioned that what I'm teaching is the same thing I've always taught, except I literally lived through it in 2017, 18, and 19, that 3-year period. Now, the fact is I have been through the experience before, and I want to talk about that when we get into tomorrow, the experience of being scapegoated. But in 2017, many of you will remember I was violently and viciously scapegoated on Facebook by the progressive Christian community. And at that time, I didn't know what was happening. What is interesting about this is around the 23rd of April or so, 18th of April, somewhere in mid to late April, we had a board meeting, a Preaching Peace board meeting, and one of the board members astutely said, "Michael, who do you think you're going to offend with your message?" And I said, "I have no doubt the right wing, the Christian right, the evangelicals, they'll be offended by it." Lori and I went to Florida on our vacation a couple of days later, and we were on vacation, and I think it was around the 28th of May, a couple of days into our vacation, when the tweet went out that would end up destroying Preaching Peace. Other events would happen, and what would begin happening over the course of the next 4 to 5 months is, because I refused to buy into elements at that time of the so-called progressive Christian narrative. I refused to buy, for example, if so those of you that were there will remember, I was challenging the interpretation of the gospel that limited it to non-whites, or particularly non-white males. And I said that's not a gospel interpretation. And I was called a racist for that, which is absurd. But then the attack came. And what stunned me were the number of Facebook friends in the hundreds that turned on me. I mean, turned on me viciously. They were out there on their little Facebook pages vilifying me. But what hurt was when the progressive Christian leadership decided that they didn't care for me. And I received some fairly, I would call them, unfriendly emails. I had one prominent Christian leader that most of you have read this person's books tell me I needed to get a spiritual counselor because I was destroying the unity of the progressive left. And at that time, I thought that was really not a helpful thing to say. But I have since discovered, and I published my paper in the autumn of 2017, essentially showing that there's no difference between progressive Christianity and conservative Christianity in the James Peter tradition. And then, of course, the new book coming out, Knowing God, which is basically an indictment of the entirety of American Protestant Christianity. But the thing was, my experience, I never saw it coming from the progressive left. I never saw it coming. I have spent my entire life in the church um, fighting for justice, as it's called, for the poor. I read tons of liberation and feminist and womanist and Latino and Latina theologies. I have paid my dues. Um, and here it was, the very people that I thought would be my friends and understand turned on me. And the pain, I mean, folks, I can't begin to tell you unless you were there, but the pain of what I thought were open-minded people turn around and become little more than a lynch mob. And that's what they were, and they may not like that term, but that's what they were. And then, of course, they did everything they could to send Preaching Peace into bankruptcy, and that succeeded. And here I was, out of everything, back to waiting tables in 2018. But I had been betrayed. The thing was, I've also been a betrayer. I know what it's like to be part of a mob that turns against somebody and joins a mob and says, get rid of this person. Or I know what it's like to betray trust. I've been there, done that, and had to be forgiven. Not had to be, but was. So betrayal has two sides. Betrayal is not about the person. You can betray a person, but what you're fundamentally betraying when you betray someone is their trust. When Judas betrays Jesus, it's not because he doesn't love him, because Judas loves Jesus. Judas probably had a passion for Jesus that runs deeper than any of ours. I'll tell you what, I think that's the case. And I think he was extraordinarily disappointed that Jesus wasn't following through on his mission to liberate Israel. And Jesus had put his trust in him. He said, buddy, I trust you to handle the money. So you do the right thing with the money. This is how we're going to disperse it. Or maybe he left that up to the 12 or whoever. And Judas is the guy that carries the purse and does the dispersals and pays for lunch and these kind of things. Jesus trusts Judas enough to handle his money. I need you to think about that for a minute, folks, because you know what it's like trusting someone to handle your money. Okay? But Jesus trusted Judas enough to handle his money. So when Judas betrays Jesus, it is the deepest betrayal of trust that could be imagined. Because Judas has not simply betrayed Jesus as the treasurer, he's betrayed Jesus as the Lord. And he forces Jesus' hand. Now, the most instructive text in all of this about betrayal comes from the Gospel of John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke simply tell you that Jesus sits at the table and says, one of you is going to betray me. But you wouldn't have known who that betrayer was if it wasn't for the Gospel of John. Or you might have, but John fleshes it out, the writer of the Gospel of John. And what gets fleshed out here is, in particular, Jesus saying, the one I give this morsel when I've dipped it. So he dips the morsel and he hands it to Judas. First person, here you go. Boom. Now, the only person that hears this is the beloved disciple. He understands that Judas is the one who betrays. None of the other disciples do. They don't get it. So Judas has to excuse himself from the table. He gets up and leaves. The disciples figure he's doing treasurer business. That's it. They continue on with their meal, not knowing that the moment Judas takes the piece of bread dipped in the oil, that things have now been set in motion that cannot be changed. Judas betrayed Jesus' trust. That's what gets betrayed. That's why betrayal in the kingdom of God, in the reign of God, is the opposite of trust. You can only betray someone's trust in you. And if you betray that trust, then there's mistrust. And mistrust, man, once you've created mistrust, it's hard to earn trust back. It can be done. I've been able to do it. So have others. It can be done, but it takes a lot of time and it takes decades. Okay. We all know this. We know what it's like to lose our trust in people. Many of us have been betrayed. And it's at this point when we recognize this is what the mob does. The mob is fickle. On Sunday, they love you. On Friday, they want to kill you. You can't trust the mob. You can't. You cannot trust the crowd. They are untrustworthy because they betray at every turn. That's what mobs do. We see the betrayal throughout history and literature. One thinks of the Salem witch trials. One thinks of the modern judicial system, for example, which really works on betrayal as a way to reach criminals. So they'll arrest the guy here that bought the pot to get him to betray who sold the pot, to get that guy to betray who sold him the pound, to get that guy to betray who sold the kilo, to get that guy to betray, who brought in the 50 pounds from Mexico, to get that one to betray the cartel leader, kind of thing. Betrayal is at the heart of the judicial enterprise, and it's also trust is in its kind of sickest form, is at the heart of the criminal enterprise. Okay? There might not be honor among thieves, but if they don't trust each other, it ain't going nowhere. And then think, of course, like groups like the mafia, where trust, if it's violated, means death. You see? Or secret societies. The world does trust in a Gnostic manner. Okay? It does betrayal in a worldly manner, but it does trust in a Gnostic manner, in a worldly manner as well. Real trust, authentic trust, has nothing to do with power, as we find it in society, or credit ratings from banks, or anything else. Real trust fundamentally has to do with honest, whole relationships where the other person is good for their word. And this is where the gospel is essential. God is trustworthy. God, the Father, is trustworthy. That's the gospel. You can trust the Father. The Father is trustworthy. The Father is life. The Father keeps the Father's promises and has kept them all in Christ. So there you have it. Betrayal is ugly, but it's part of the mechanism. No, social betrayal is painful. There are few worse things than being crucified online. I have been there. Okay? So when the mob, in the next 6 months or a year, begins its feeding frenzy, looking for scapegoats, don't join them. It's one thing to be a critic of politicians. It's another to scapegoat them. That's why I might be critical of our current administration. But as I've said a million times, it's not a cause-effect thing. They have responsibilities. I think they've blown them. But they're not the cause of our social maladies. We are. So it's going to be very, very important not to jump on a scapegoating bandwagon. That doesn't mean you can't be critical. Okay, so the administration right now says, oh, you can't even be critical of us. You're scapegoating us. And the followers of the administration go, oh, they're trying to scapegoat us. No, there's a difference between being critical and scapegoating. To be critical is rational. To scapegoat is purely emotional. And while there are those that are there for sure, not everyone is there, and it's good not to lump everybody into the same boat on this. And this includes all sides. What does this mean for us? Number one, for those of us that have been called to follow Jesus, it means we are called to trust and not to betray that trust. God is trustworthy. We betray that trust when we don't trust the Father, when we seek to make God act, when we do the crazy superstitious things like throw out a fleece, that kind of nonsense that people do. It's not our place to test the Father. It's our place to trust the Father. That's what we're called to do. And that's why I said in my book, Knowing God, circumstances are not a barometer of the love of God. Jesus is no less loved 2 hours after Judas betrays him and he's arrested than he is sitting at meal with his disciples. The Father loves Jesus all through this. There is no wrath of God Calvinist bullshit. That's all nonsense. Just throw that out. The Father loves the Son, and the Son has obeyed the Father and heard the Father. And so on this night of nights, when he is betrayed and his hand is forced, and he has an opportunity to call down legions of angels and start a violent holy war and save his own skin, again, and for the last time, he rejects all violence. He rejects militarism. He rejects militancy. He rejects retribution. He rejects vengeance. All of this gets rejected in the Garden of Gethsemane. So Judas's betrayal, as horrific as it was, a betrayal of Jesus' trust in him, in this sense plays a part in our salvation. And without it, well, we don't know how the narrative would go, but we know what does happen because of it. We cannot scapegoat Judas. The Jerusalem church did that. That's why the New Testament appears to scapegoat Judas. Now, I say appears because Judas is only mentioned in the gospel tradition. Paul only does not, of course, mention Judas, but the only thing he has is the Lord's Supper as it's handed on to him in the tradition on the night he was betrayed. And I imagine that narrative would have been expanded as Paul is talking to Gentile churches. But Judas doesn't function as a scapegoat in Paul's thinking, nor the writer to the Hebrews. I think the challenge for us is not to join in the kind of scapegoating that can be read into the synoptic narratives generally and into the Johannine narrative in particular. I don't think Judas functioned as a scapegoat for the Johannine community, but he may well have for the Jerusalem community. These are things that, exegetes can work on. But the early church was not immune to participating in scapegoating. Paul, scapegoater par excellence, ends up writing the theology of the scapegoat in his great letters, Galatians, Romans, and Corinthians. And in these letters, he has the Father sending the Son. And this sending is a sending where if he sent unto his own and his own reject him. There's already this awareness that one is taking a word that will be rejected. And this is profound because it's precisely at that point that we see the incredible love of God, willing to even go where we refuse to see and refuse to hear, and still bring us the good news. And that good news begins already here tonight in Gethsemane with the renunciation of all militarism, all vengeance, everything, even vengeance against Judas. Wish you some good thoughts and sleep tonight. Peace and love.